don't know, 48 hours since this deal happened. You and I have spoken a few times. Safe to say you had many emotions. How are you feeling 48 hours later after this franchise-altering moment for the Mavericks?
Worse, somehow worse, I guess, at this point. I just seeing the response from Mavs fans and honestly seeing the mass exodus, I guess time will tell on that, but the mass exodus of people sending me messages and saying, "It was great to know you, man. I really appreciate everything you've done for me, but I'll never listen to your show again or never see you again." Like the amount of people that are giving up on the Mavs. They're giving up on the Mavs and giving up on shows like mine and stuff. This trade really did affect so many people's lives, and it still feels like 3 days later, it still feels like the only person happy about this is Nico Harrison.
I mean, okay, that is a really strong reaction from Mavericks fans, and I get the idea of them being really pissed off, but at the same time, like, this is a fan base that has experienced championships. Like, I have not thought of them, and you know them better than I do, as like total front runners or bandwagoners or whatever. Like, is this just them being attached to Luka, or them really being mad at getting sideswiped by Nico Harrison and ownership?
I think a lot of the online stuff that you're seeing right now, there's a lot of Slovenian fans who I'm only a Mavericks fan because of Luka, and so I'm going to now leave. But there is a big amount of Mavericks fans. You saw them, if you saw the videos and the pictures in front of the American Airlines Center, two of them had a coffin that they brought to do a vigil for Luka Doncic. People were throwing their Mavericks gear at the feet of the Dirk Nowitzki statue as a shrine to Luka to say bye. There were signs about how Nico Harrison should be fired and all kinds of things, because this really affected people. And your point is correct that Mavericks fans are not front runners in that sense. They are deeply connected to Dirk Nowitzki, who had this incredible run where he wins MVP. Then the next year he gets out in the first round. They lose in the finals. Then he has to do his sabbatical in Australia. He comes back, and in 2011 they make this miraculous run and win a title that means so much to Mavericks fans. That title may mean more to Mavericks fans than any other fan base that I've interacted with in doing this job. And I think that Luka then coming in at the tail end of Dirk's tenure, playing with Dirk, and then bridging the gap from that era to now the Luka era, and now we're post-Luka era, which is absolutely wild. But to see that, Mavericks fans had such a connection to him and such a love and a deep appreciation for Luka. He was their guy, and now he's gone.
Talking with Nick Angstadt, covers the Mavericks for the LockedOn Mavs podcast, part of the LockedOn Podcast Network. Lakers talk, Andy Kamenetzky. Obviously, I think it's very clear you would not have traded Luka in a million years. But removing that piece of it, as someone who covers the Mavs, how concerned had you been about Luka's conditioning and whether that was getting in the way of him reaching his truest ceiling, or if he ages, it's going to be tougher for him to rely on talent? Again, not trying to justify the trade, but just the idea of this being a concern for you.
Yeah, not enough to trade him. It's a concern for sure, but you still, you read you hear some of the responses from some of the executives around the league and stuff. They're yeah, there's a concern for Luka about his conditioning stuff. He still rolls out of bed and is an MVP candidate. If that's what you're concerned about, at least he's producing. Maybe he hasn't reached his full 100% potential, but at least he's to the point where he's better than 99.99% of the players in the NBA. So
that's pretty good.
It was a concern for sure. And part of the concern is that his conditioning was connected to some of these injuries, and that he's still having these leg issues over and over again, and that may never halt again, and then maybe he turns into Joel Embiid and something like that. And I don't know. Who is going to know? Who can predict the future on that with Luka? But that does seem to be the bet that Nico Harrison made. We talked about it on LockedOn Mavs today that Nico Harrison made the biggest sports bet in NBA history by betting against Luka Doncic that he would ever reach his full potential, and that is an insane bet in my book.
Yeah, that is truly. You want to talk about a set of stones, whether you're talking about from Nico Harrison, whether you're talking about ownership either signing off on Nico's premonition or giving Nico the directive, we don't want to pay for this moving forward. We are also betting against him, figure out what to do. How much of a sense, if at all, do you have of Nico Harrison, Jason Kidd, ownership. I know it's a new ownership group, so they may not know Luke on a personal level as well, but just people that have been around him trying to talk to him about this and like trying to get him to take better care of his body, like that they had exhausted possibilities before they got to this point.
Yeah, I mean, the Tim McMahon piece on ESPN today, kind of highlighted some of that. They had tried different ways, that Luka had even brought in his own team. This was a thing 2 years ago where Luka brought in his own nutritionist and chef, and he brought in a personal trainer and all that kind of stuff. And it seemed to work a little, and then he just goes back, and he has these moments where all of a sudden he's out of shape again. I mean, there was an 11-game stretch or 11-day stretch or something where the Mavericks, he was out because of a quote-unquote wrist injury, and we were all kind of skeptical about the wrist injury, and then McMahon's story confirms that it wasn't really because of wrist injury. They were trying to let Luka go and get in shape, like to go and have a run at getting back into shape at that point and to be in game shape and let him, do that. And it's wild that continues to be a problem. And yet still he could average a triple-double, 30 points a game, lead the NBA in scoring and hit the game-winning shot that night. He's just like a marvel in that sense, where he is so different than Kobe. That's when you try to compare superstars. And you and I on LockedOn Lakers, we even talk about how he's kind of more like Shaq, where he doesn't care about his conditioning to a point. He's like, I'll play myself into shape, and he goes on this crazy run in March and April, and then into the playoffs, and then he's playing incredible basketball.
But then at the same time, we're talking Nick Angstadt, covers the Mavericks for the Locked On Mavs podcast, part of the LockedOn Podcast Network. Luka is a lot like Kobe in the sense that he's got that killer part of him, and he's got that grudge-holding part of him. He's the dude that is just a psychopath competitor, even if the commitment to fitness isn't there. I'm sure everyone listening to this show has seen Luka play many times, but as somebody who watched him on a game-in, game-out basis, what are some of the aspects of his game that jumped out at you in terms of just making him really special?
You're gonna make me sad, Andy. You're gonna make me sad going through all these. But I will say that if you heard Klay Thompson recently, there was that moment where Kobe came to one of Luka's games, and he was sitting there on the sidelines with the WNBA hoodie. He came over to Luka and was like, he gave him kind of a nod and dapped him up. And Klay said recently, he said that Kobe didn't do that for anybody. He got Kobe to leave the house, and he got Kobe to come out to a basketball game. That's how much Kobe admired Luka and thought of Luka and said, I got to go see this guy. And so I thought that was a good stamp of approval right there, especially for Lakers fans. But for Luka and his game, it's just that he can pick apart any defense. You can put any defense in front of him, he's going to pick it apart. Double teams. You can play drop coverage with your big. You can twist everything. You can give him a center. You can put the best defenders in the NBA on him. It just doesn't matter. He's going to find a way. He's going to figure it out. He's going to look at you from across the court, and he's going to say, you're not going to stop me. And if you do, I'm going to make it a point to come down the next play to score on you. And there's just some kind of mentality there that is a lot like Kobe in that sense. There's a story that Spencer Dinwiddie told us at Media Day 2 or 3 years ago, where the Mavericks brought to Luka. They said, you score 0.8 points per 100 per possession on this player. You score 1.2 points per possession on this player. So let's try to get you a switch to get you on the player that you score better again. And Luka said, no, I'm not going to do that. And he attacked the player over and over again that day that he scored worse on, just to prove that he could do it and to prove that he could actually go out there and score on that other player. And Dinwiddie did not confirm to us, but we guessed that it was Mike Conley and Rudy Gobert, and they went at Rudy Gobert over and over again in that series.
Oh, does he not like Rudy? I hadn't gotten that sense, Nick. They've never seemed to have any beef.
That's one thing now, Lakers fans. You have now just inherited a whole lot of enemies because Luka will have these random guys. Rudy Gobert is not random, but he's obviously one of them. Terrence Mann, Lou Dort, Mo Wagner, just these random players in the NBA that all of a sudden that hate Luka and Luka hates them.
How do you picture him and LeBron meshing, and the process between him and Kyrie eventually getting on the same page? Do you think that's a useful template?
Yeah, thinking about those two guys together is kind of wild, and I don't know that we've seen two guys like that in the NBA ever that can pass the way that they do. I know I saw a clip of the Laker Film Room podcast with Pete where they were just talking about the on-ball different combinations they could do with Luka and LeBron, they just started cackling because those guys know so much about the X's and O's and just know that like how those two guys they have every option. Like that's the thing about Luka too, is he has every single option in front of him. You want him to post up, you want him to hit a mid-range shot, you want him to hit a step back three, he very recently started to pick up the catch and shoot threes. That was like the one weakness in his game for a while, that he would shoot 37% on step back threes and 29% on catch and shoot wide open threes. And it made no sense, but he's recently gotten better at that. He's been playing more off ball with Kyrie and all that. But that was the one weakness. So to see LeBron and Luka together, the offense is just, I mean, every shooter could want to go play for the Lakers right now.
Last question for you. We're talking Nick Angstadt, covers the Mavericks for the Locked On Podcast Network. He's the host of the Locked On Mavs podcast. Luka has a reputation as, shall we say, a bad defender. How accurate do you think that is?
Luka Doncic can be a above-average defender in a good scheme. He has proven that over and over again. We have an episode of Locked On Mavs from like 2 or 3 years ago where we said Luka was an underrated defender, that Luka was a very good defender at times. He can if he's locked in. Statistically, according to Synergy and other places, he is one of the best isolation and post-up defenders in the NBA. So when he's locked in and he's got somebody in front of him, he can stay in front of somebody. He can form a wall and stop players from getting by him if he wants to, if he's motivated to. If the other time when he's not, or when he maybe out of shape or out of condition, or when he's putting so much into the offensive end, taking 30 shots a game or whatever he decides to take, that he wears down and he's going to give up stuff on the defensive end. And for the Mavericks defense for a while, it was, if there's one weak link, the whole thing falls apart, and then all of a sudden the defense looks awful. And Luka was the biggest culprit of that at times. 2 years ago when the Mavericks missed the postseason entirely, there's a player that may be on the Lakers right now, that may be a big man, that may be a shooting big man that wanted a bigger contract from the Mavericks and didn't get it, that became a real weak link in the Mavericks defense. And Luka kind of looked across the court and looked at him like, well, if that guy's not playing defense, then I'm not going to play defense either. And it just was absolutely terrible. And that's why they missed the playoffs that season for many other reasons. But when he is locked in and when he has a good system around him, he can be a good defender. It just depends on when he chooses to be.
He's Nick Angstadt. He covers the Mavericks as the host of the Locked On Mavs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And I just want to say, for all these Slovenian fans that Nick has entertained for several years now, don't get me wrong, I want you over at Locked On Lakers. I'm very glad to have you, but don't abandon Nick. Like, Nick has been so good to you people. Like, you can do, as we always say on the podcast, first listen, second listen. Make us both your listen. Like, don't do Nick like this. That ain't cool.
Andy, they're gone, man. They're gone. But I'm still here. For whatever Mavericks fans are left, I'm still over here.
Sorry, brother. I tried. Thank you for the time, man. Appreciate it.
Anytime.
That is Nick Angstadt. Again, honestly, if you're looking right